A soft murmur of voices, the echo of someone's footsteps, and the scent of old wooden pews filled the Church of the Holy Trinity. It was early Sunday morning, and the sun, filtering through the tall stained glass windows, cast colorful patterns on the floor. Pastor Ethan Holloway stood at the pulpit, gazing into the empty hall. This was his morning ritual of silence before the service began, a moment when he was alone with his faith in God. But today, God was silent. Today, his mind was filled not with prayers, but with memories. Lauren, the name of his wife, echoed in his head like a refrain. He remembered how they met 17 years ago. She was a medical student full of life, and he was just beginning his path in ministry. They loved each other passionately, recklessly, as only the young can. But love is not an eternal flame. Sometimes it fades so slowly that you don't notice until one day you wake up and feel only cold. The last few months, something had changed. Lauren had become distant, absent-minded. She avoided his gaze. Her phone was always with her, and her smile seemed forced. And he, like a fool, believed everything was fine. Ethan ran his hand over the worn Bible that had belonged to his father. He knew these pages by heart, but lately they brought him no comfort. He remembered the day it all began. It was an ordinary Tuesday. He had stopped by the hospital to surprise Lauren with lunch. She had been working more and more, and he was starting to worry that they hardly spent any time together. But as he approached the reception desk, he overheard a conversation between two nurses. "I saw her again. With that man. They looked like a couple." "Are you sure?" "She's the pastor's wife, after all." "I know, but they were sitting close, their hands almost touching. And it wasn't the first time." Ethan felt something snap inside him. He wanted to approach them, to ask what they were talking about, but his body wouldn't move. He just stood there, listening as his life crumbled. That evening, when Lauren came home, he looked at her differently. She walked into the kitchen, put down her bag, and smiled. "How was your day?" Ethan watched her move, smoothly, carefree, as if nothing had changed. He wanted to ask her. He wanted to demand the truth. But when she came closer, he smelled a strange perfume on her clothes. It was something subtle, barely noticeable, but not his scent, not theirs. "Everything was fine," he replied, hiding his pain behind a forced smile. And at night, lying next to her in bed, he felt a void between them, like an abyss into which he was slowly falling. The next morning, he did something he had never done before. He started following his wife. He wanted to believe it was just suspicions, brought on by fatigue. But each new day brought new evidence. Lauren started staying late at work more often. Her phone was always with her, and she turned the screen away when typing messages. She started wearing lingerie that hadn't been in her wardrobe before. And then, on that fateful day when his patience ran out, he saw him, Gregory Cross, a doctor, a man he once considered a friend. He watched as Lauren got into Gregory's car. He didn't hug her, he didn't kiss her, but he held her hand a little longer than he should have. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen, staring at the wall, his heart pounding like a hammer. He thought about all the sermons he had given about fidelity, about how he had told his congregation that trust was the foundation of marriage. He believed in that, and now his faith was shattering before his very eyes. The question was not whether Lauren was cheating. The question was how long she had been lying to him. Just a few weeks ago, he would have prayed, sought answers in the words of the Lord. But today he thirsted for revenge. Some things cannot be unseen. They become etched in your mind, leaving wounds that never heal. And then you live, knowing that the world that was yours will never be the same. Ethan Holloway didn't know how long he had been sitting motionless. The room around him was dark. The only source of light was the cold blue glow of the laptop screen. He had installed a hidden camera in the bedroom a week ago. A hidden fear, growing into an obsession, had driven him to it. He hated himself for it, but he hated even more that his suspicions had been confirmed. And now he was watching as his life crumbled before his very eyes. Ethan hit play, and the world he knew collapsed in an instant. First there was silence, then the click of a door, the sound of her footsteps. Lauren. She entered the room, his room, their sanctuary. where they once whispered words of love, made plans for the future, where he kissed her neck every morning before work. But today she was not alone. A man's voice, a rough whisper, laughter. A voice he recognized immediately. Gregory Cross, a doctor, a man who should have been his friend, a man he had trusted. Ethan's chest tightened, as if someone had ripped the air from his lungs. Lauren turned to him, her face glowing with something Ethan hadn't seen in years. She was smiling, genuinely, sincerely, the way she used to smile only at him. She looked at Gregory the way she hadn't looked at him in a long time. Ethan couldn't breathe. This was his home, his wife, his damn life. Her hands on his shoulders, his fingers running through her hair. They lingered, savoring the moment, as if enjoying the forbidden. Then a kiss. Lips that once belonged only to him, now belonged to another. Something inside him broke. A cold, deadly feeling welled up in his chest. Clothes slid to the floor. Ethan didn't turn off the video. He couldn't. He needed to see everything, every detail, every moment, so he could never go back. He watched as they moved in a rhythm that was once only theirs. He watched as she arched her back, gasping with pleasure he could no longer give her. He watched as Gregory whispered something in her ear, something that made her laugh the way she used to laugh next to him. They no longer belonged to him. He no longer belonged to them. In that moment, he died. He felt nothing. No rage, no pain, no hatred, just emptiness. An emptiness that had become his new reality. The video ended. He closed the laptop, sat in the dark, clenching his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. Lauren didn't know that he knew, but now he knew, and he wasn't going to let it go. Some wounds never heal. They don't leave scars. They become a part of you. And then one day you wake up and realize you're no longer the person you used to be. Ethan didn't know how long he had been sitting in the dark. 5 minutes, an hour, an eternity. He didn't remember turning off the video. He didn't remember closing the laptop, but he remembered every sound, every movement, every moan that tore his heart apart. His fingers were trembling, but not from fear. His chest rose and fell in heavy, deep breaths, but not from panic. His eyes were empty, because where there used to be light, there was now only darkness. He should have been angry. He should have torn this house apart, smashed that damn laptop, burn the bed, rip out everything that connected him to this woman. But he just sat there. The inevitability of realization. She was no longer his. The blow to the heart. He was the last to know. The loud silence in the room. The only sound in his head. Her laughter. Not for him. And then he felt it. Fire. Hot, burning, rising from within like poison. Rage that cannot be quenched with words. In an instant, he jumped up. The chair crashed backward, the loud crack breaking the silence of the room. His breathing was ragged, heavy, like that of a cornered animal. He was no longer a pastor. He was no longer the Ethan Holloway the church knew. That man had died the moment his wife moaned with pleasure in another man's arms. He rose, not feeling his legs. In his chest, there was only one desire: to find her, to look her in the eye. Do you know what you've done? Do you understand that you've destroyed me? Do you see what's left of me? But before he took a step toward the door, something inside him stopped. Number. She wouldn't know. Not yet. She wouldn't see him broken. Let her think he still knew nothing. Let her think he was still her loving, naive, blind husband. Gregory Cross. That bastard. The man he had welcomed into his home. The man with whom he had shared coffee and talked about life. The man who had betrayed him first. He would be the first victim. Ethan Holloway now had a new mission, and that mission was revenge. When you are betrayed, you can either drown in pain or learn to breathe in hatred. Ethan Holloway had never felt so alive. All night he didn't sleep. All night his mind raced like molten metal, forged into a new shape. All night he thought through every detail. When you're a pastor, you have to forgive. You have to seek the light even in the darkest of people. But he was no longer a pastor, and he was no longer seeking the light. Outside, the city was waking up. Neighbors were walking their dogs. An elderly couple sat on their porch drinking coffee and discussing the news. A young mother pushed a stroller, humming a soft lullaby. All this clean, ordinary world. No one knew that he had just watched his wife spread her legs for another man. No one heard her moans tearing his heart apart. No one saw his hands trembling as he turned off the video. He was among people, but he was no longer part of their world. When Lauren woke up, he was already in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in front of him, a newspaper he wasn't reading, the perfect image of an ordinary morning. She entered in a robe, her hair slightly disheveled, just like every morning, but he saw her differently now. "Good morning," she yawned, not looking at him. "Morning," he replied, taking a sip of coffee. Don't ask unnecessary questions. Don't give yourself away. Let her believe he was still her blind, naive husband. She approached, leaned down to kiss him on the cheek. Ethan clenched his fists under the table. She smelled like his home, but she no longer belonged to him. Her lips touched his skin, but there was not a drop of sincerity in them. "Are you going to church today?" she asked, pouring herself some coffee. He looked at her. Her hand didn't tremble. Her voice betrayed no hint of guilt. She lived as if nothing had happened. Damn actress. "Of course," he smiled, leaning back. "I think I'll skip today," she said, taking a sip. "I had a long shift yesterday. I want to rest a bit." A lie told so easily that it turned his stomach. He knew she hadn't been on shift yesterday. He knew her body bore the marks of another man's hands. He knew she was tired not from work, but from being fucked by another man. "Of course, dear," his voice was soft. "Rest well. Let her believe he knew nothing. Let her relax. Let her think her secret was safe, because when she found out the truth, it would be too late." Gregory Cross. He wasn't content with just destroying their marriage. He had destroyed his faith. He had destroyed the man Ethan Holloway used to be. And now he had to pay. But not right away. Not crudely. Not impulsively. No, it had to be beautiful. Cold-blooded. Painful. Like a well-planned sermon. Like the final prayer before an execution. All day, Ethan spent watching. Every step Gregory took. Every meeting. Every habit. Weakness. Vulnerability. He learned what time he left work. What routes he took. Where he went when he thought no one was watching. And most importantly, when he was alone. When the sun had set, Ethan closed his notebook full of notes. He was ready. He knew what to do. And he wouldn't stop. Some sins cannot be atoned for. Some souls do not seek redemption. Some people choose the flame because fire is all they feel now. The night was starless. The city lived its ordinary life. But in that darkness, a new man was born. Ethan Holloway was dead. Only rage remained. Gregory Cross, the man he once called a brother in faith, the man who smiled at him after services, the man who entered his home and destroyed his family. Now he was the target. Ethan followed him. Every day, every hour. Gregory had no idea he was being watched. He left the hospital at 7 p.m., went to the gym 3 times a week, sometimes drove to the home of a lonely woman with whom he apparently played the same game. But more often, he went to Lauren, to his wife. Number not to his wife. She was dead to him, but Gregory was still alive. Ethan knew he couldn't strike right away. He had to wait for the right moment, like a hunter watching his prey. And then he saw his chance. Friday, late evening. Gregory parked his car outside a bar he frequented after work. He was alone, and he had already had a few drinks because his steps were too relaxed. Ethan smiled. He didn't even have to try. He just waited for him to come out. When Gregory emerged, the street was almost deserted. The lights of the bar cast a dim glow on the asphalt. He was fumbling for his keys when he heard a voice. "Dr. Cross." Gregory froze, turned around, narrowed his eyes. Ethan. He clearly hadn't expected to see him here. His eyes narrowed with suspicion, but his voice still held that false friendliness. "What the hell are you doing here, Pastor?" Gregory tried to smile, but there was a slight nervousness in his tone. Ethan took a step forward. "Pastor," he sneered, "I thought you stopped calling me that." Gregory frowned. Something in Ethan's voice made him tense, as if he sensed that this night would not end so simply. "Listen, if you're here to talk about Lauren, He didn't get to finish. The blow was quick, straight to the solar plexus. Gregory doubled over, gasping for air. The next blow, a knee to the face, a crunch. Blood spattered onto the sidewalk. Gregory crumpled to the ground, his breathing labored. But this was only the beginning. Ethan crouched down next to him, grabbing his collar. His voice was cold. "Tell me, Gregory, did you ever feel guilty?" Gregory coughed, blood trickling from his lips. He tried to smile, but his teeth were red. "I think you're being too dramatic, Pastor." Another blow. Gregory groaned, his body jerking with pain. "I asked you a question." Gregory fell silent, but there was no remorse in his eyes, only contempt. "You were always weak, Holloway. You couldn't satisfy her. You knew that." Another blow. But now Ethan wasn't hitting just for revenge. Now he was hitting for the truth. He grabbed Gregory by the throat, pinned him against the wall, making him feel fear. "Did you know I would find out?" Gregory gasped, but he sneered. "Of course. Lauren said you were a weakling. You wouldn't do anything anyway." "Mistake. Big mistake." Ethan pressed him even harder. "You were wrong." A flicker of understanding passed through Gregory's eyes. And then, fear. Real fear. Gregory remained where he fell. He was no longer smiling. He was no longer speaking. Ethan stood over him, feeling a strange silence within. Was he relieved? Number. But was he closer to the truth? Yes. Revenge does not bring relief. It burns everything, leaving only emptiness. The blood was still on his hands, but not the blood that could be seen, the blood that clung to the soul. Gregory Cross was no longer laughing. He was no longer looking at him with mockery. Now he knew fear, but he was not the only one who had to pay. There was one last step, one last lie he had to shatter. Lauren. When Ethan returned home, the night was deep. The house was quiet, too quiet. She was sleeping, in the same bed where she had recently lain with Gregory, in the same damn room that no longer belonged to him. Ethan stopped in the doorway, watching how her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of sleep, how her hair was spread out on the pillow, how her lips twitched slightly. Maybe she was seeing something in her dreams. Maybe she was seeing him, or still seeing him. Gregory? He approached closer. His shadow fell on her face. His breathing was steady. His heart was dead. "Wake up, Lauren." Her eyes fluttered open, slowly, sleepily. "Ethan?" Her voice was hoarse. "What happened?" She still didn't know. She still thought he was the same person. She still didn't understand that he had seen everything. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He looked at her, deeply, penetratingly. "Did you ever love me?" His voice was soft. She blinked. "What? You? Did you ever love me?" Seconds ticked by. Her breathing faltered. She understood. She knew. "Ethan." The lie was already on the tip of her tongue, but he was no longer willing to listen. He took out his phone, opened the video, turned the screen toward her. She watched, and in her eyes there was no remorse, no shock, only fear. "Did you know I would find out?" he asked calmly. She said nothing, just looked at him, silently, because the answer was obvious. He stood up. She also sat up, trembling, wrapping herself in the blanket. "You don't understand, Ethan." He sneered. "Number, I understand everything." She took a step forward. "I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how." He took a step back. "You didn't want to tell me. You wanted me to never know." Her eyes filled with tears. "I made a mistake." Ethan shook his head. "No, Lauren, you made a choice." She froze. The words that were meant to soften him had the opposite effect. He looked at her and saw nothing, only emptiness. She was no longer his wife. She was no longer the person he loved. She was just a woman he used to know. He turned around, headed for the door. Her voice trembled. "Ethan, where are you going?" He stopped, but he didn't turn around. "To a place where I am no longer in your life." And then he left and never came back.